You can have your
Main event of the evening.
ready to race to you. These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, you're discussing the first episode of The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, King for a Day.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in King for a Day.
We begin with a title sequence where Wolfman Jack narrates that Fonzie, Richie, Ralph, and Fonzie's dog, Mr. Cool, who walks on his hind legs, met a time-traveling girl from the future named Cupcake, and she ended up accidentally bringing them through time in her time machine.
They do not dig where that machine is going, but they sure hope to get back to 1957 Milwaukee.
And when we start the episode proper, they are flying through space in her malfunctioning time machine. Fonzie is able to get it back on the right track with a kick to the console. Mr. Cool mimics his owner, and his kick sends the time machine careening through history. They land near some palm trees, which Ralph declares to be a sign that they're only a bus ride from Milwaukee. They all go to find a bus, though Fonzie has to remind Cupcake to use the door instead of walking through the wall.
I'll get it right this time.
That future chick is good looking, but she'll never learn.
A thing that future people can apparently do. Outside, they realize that what the time machine landed on was, in fact, a brontosaurus.
Oh, come on. Everybody knows brontosauruses are extinct.
Tell that to him!
Oh!
Cupcake, Richie, and Ralph go running and get tangled in some vines. Fonzie is able to tame the beast with some eye contact, and then Mr. Cool gets on his nerves, sending the time machine into a pool of quicksand.
Well, Rich, it's gonna be a long walk back to 1957.
And then Richie and Ralph are kidnapped by some cavemen. Fonzie, Cupcake, and Mr. Cool go to find the abducted redheads, leaving the still-tamed brontosaurus to guard the submerged machine. While doing so, Fonzie gets kidnapped by a cave woman named Bruta.
Excuse-moi, lady, but this is where I get off.
But he's able to escape. Richie and Ralph are in a wooden cage, where Ralph tries to throw Richie under the bus until he finds out the cavemen are choosing a king. He volunteers and gets to the gig.
King Ralph the First. I kinda like the sound of that.
Fonzie, Cupcake, and Mr. Cool have run afoul of a T-Rex. Fonzie wants to beat it up, but Cupcake tries to levitate it away, only to levitate herself and her companions instead onto a nearby cliff. Bruta is now in the path of the dinosaur, so Fonzie grabs a vine and swings her out of danger. By following the sound of drums, the trio discover a prehistoric village, where a couple of cavemen take them to their leader. There's also a rock with the words, "No strangers allowed," carved into it. Yes, in English. They find Ralph, sitting on a throne surrounded by beautiful cave women. Richie is still in his cage. Cupcake tries to rescue him, but ends up teleporting herself, Fonzie, and Mr. Cool behind bars. Fonzie asks why they made Ralph their king.
Man to rock now, huh? Tell me something. Why would you want someone like Ralph Mouth to be your king?
And the caveman says it's only for the day. Every sundown, they feed their king to the volcano, and once Ralph is gone, they'll choose a new king from the strangers. The cave people take the still oblivious Ralph on what he thinks is a tour of his kingdom. The gang has to save him, but first they have to escape. Cupcake's powers are what trapped them, and Mr. Cool is no help either, so it's up to Fonzie to save the day. With a whistle, he summons Bruta.
Can you get Hunky Stranger out of cage? Hey, Hunky Baby! You what?
Who tears the side off the cage and carries Fonzie away with a swing on a vine. Mr. Cool chases after him, and the two find a shortcut to the volcano through an underground lava cave. At the top of the volcano, Ralph now knows what's actually going on,
No, I'm allergic to lava! Really! I break out!
because two cavemen are about to throw him in. Richie and Cupcake are there too, being trapped by the cavemen. Richie declares that if they throw Ralph in, they have to throw him and Cupcake in too, which the cavemen are fine with. Whoops. From below, Fonzie and Mr. Cool plan a rescue. Using a hollow stalactite as a megaphone, Fonzie pretends to be the fire god.
Alright, cool it! This is your fire god speaking!
He claims he's full, and threatens them with eruption if they feed him any more kings. The terrified cavemen disperse, and Fonzie and Mr. Cool reunite with their friends. The gang tries to figure out a way to get to the other side of the village where the time machine is, without alerting the cave people. Disguised as bushes, they try to sneak across, but Mr. Cool goes the wrong way and is discovered. The gang make a run for it and get lost. When the cavemen chase after them on Triceratopses, Fonzie makes them like a matador, using a large leaf as a cape.
Whoa, Toro!
They're discovered by the Brontosaurus, who brings them back to where they crashed, and then pulls the time machine out of the quicksand. Fonzie says goodbye to his dino pal, then has to deal with the returning Bruta.
Hey, you heard, Bruta, baby? I got a split. Ruta not let Hunky Baby go.
As much as he wants to say goodbye to her properly, the machine is counting down to go, so she has to settle for a kiss and run. The gang is all set to go home, until Mr. Cool tries to kiss Cupcake and ends up falling on the controls, sending them careening through history again.
Thank you, Peter. That was King for a Day. It first aired back on November 8th, 1980. This was 6 months after Ralph's Family Problem, the last episode of Happy Days, in which Ron Howard and Don Most were series regulars. So in a weird way, Hanna-Barbera brought Richie and Ralph back into our lives. This actually mattered to me when I was a kid.
Aww.
For the 1980-81 TV season, the Fonz and the Happy Days gang aired on ABC at 9 o'clock a.m. on Saturday mornings. On November 8th, it was followed by the premiere of the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo Show.
The Richie Rich Scooby-Doo Show!
It's Scrappy, too.
In this episode, Scooby and Shaggy deal with a hungry vampire. CBS aired the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show that season, featuring classic cartoons from Warner Brothers, and NBC had given its 9 o'clock hour over to the Flintstones. As of November 8th, they were still rerunning Fred and Barney Meet the Shmoo. In a few weeks, they would premiere a new series, The Flintstone Comedy Show. What are you watching this week?
I always forget that the Shmoo were a thing until I'm reminded, and then I just have to stop and think about how utterly bizarre their whole deal is. They were introduced in the pages of Lil Abner, where it's just like, yeah, here are these vaguely magical creatures who are just perfect sources of food and clothing, and I think they grant wishes. Look, everything about the Shmoo kind of disturbs me because they want to be eaten, they enjoy being eaten, and that is a bridge too far for me. I'm not really a Richie Rich person, but I do like Scooby-Doo, so that's probably my pick.
When I was a kid, I definitely watched Happy Days followed by the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo show, although I would have been tempted by that Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show on CBS. As for our directors, at least in season 1, these episodes do not have individual credits for writing and directing. Instead, we have 3 credited directors for the entire season: George Gordon, Carl Urbano, and Rudy Zamora.
George Gordon was born in 1906, and his credits in animation go back to the 1930s. He worked on animated shorts for MGM and Terry Toons. In the 1960s and 70s, he got into TV animation, working for DePatie Freeling. He finally wound up at Hanna-Barbera in the late 1970s, working on various Flintstones and Scooby-Doo shows, plus Godzilla and the Super Globetrotters. He worked on all the animated spin-offs of the Gary Marshall shows, plus Shirt Tales, Pac-Man, The Smurfs, Mon-Chi-Chi, The Dukes, and more. He died in 1986.
Any of those shows appeal to you there, Peter?
I heard the word Super Globetrotters, and I had a brief moment of, wait, what? And then I remembered, oh yeah.
Yeah, they did a regular Harlem Globetrotters show, and then they did one where they had superpowers.
They're covering all their bases. For the kids who don't like the regular Harlem Globetrotters, but do like superheroes.
I also remember being legitimately scared of the Godzilla cartoon.
Up from the depths, 30 stories high, breathing fire, his head in the sky, Godzilla!
Even though they tried to soften it up with his sidekick Godzuki. As for Carl Urbano,
he was born in 1910, and his animation career also began in the 1930s. He, too, worked on animated shorts for MGM, though he also made educational films, including 1953's A is for Atom, about atomic power, sponsored by General Electric. He worked on many Hanna-Barbera series from the late 1970s to the early 1990s.
Over the years, many cars have rolled across the drawing board of cartoonist Carl Urbano.
He even worked on the animated Bill and Ted series and Rick Moranis' Gravedale High, plus Super Friends, Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, and much more. He died in 2003.
I would think that working on this show would have been good practice for working on the Bill and Ted series.
Because the Bill and Ted series was also about time travel, albeit for a reason that feels more sense-making because that's what the movies are about.
Our third director is Rudy Zamora.
Do you have any special things that you'd like to be remembered by in the animation business?
The good ones I like to retain, the bad ones, they're forgotten already anyway, so.
Rudy was a Mexican-American animator born in Mexico City in 1910. His earliest known credit is from 1929. He worked at both Fleischer and Disney. For a while in the 1950s, he worked at Jam Handy, a company that made educational and industrial films. His big break came in 1959 when he started working on The Bullwinkle Show and Peabody's Improbable History for J. Ward Productions. Like George and Carl, Rudy worked for Hanna-Barbera in the 1970s and 1980s, toiling on various Flintstones and Scooby-Doo spinoffs, plus Trollkins, The Little Rascals, The Gary Coleman Show, Snorks, and much more. He died in 1989. In Keith Scott's biography of J. Ward, The Moose That Roared, it's claimed that his mother nursed Pancho Villa. Zamora's fluency in Spanish proved very valuable to the Bullwinkle team since that show was produced in conjunction with an animation studio in Mexico.
Will the Happy Days gang ever run up against Pancho Villa in any of these upcoming episodes? I don't know.
No, but now I wish they did.
As for writers, the season 1 episodes of Fonz and the Happy Days gang do not have individual writing credits either. Instead, we have 4 credited story editors: Barry Blitzer, Ray Parker, Dwayne Poole, and Tom Swale.
Barry Blitzer was a TV comedy writer from New York, born in 1929. He began his TV career in the 1950s writing for live-action series like The Phil Silver Show. In the 1960s, he kept writing for sitcoms like McHale's Navy, Get Smart, and The Andy Griffith Show, but he also wrote for Hanna-Barbera on Top Cat and The Flintstones. That trend continued in the 1970s. He wrote for sitcoms like When Things Were Rotten and Good Times, plus California Fever, which aired opposite Happy Days. But he also worked on animated series like The Partridge Family 2200 AD and Goober and the Ghost Chasers. Notably, in 1977, he worked on Hanna-Barbera's Hey, It's the King, which was an animated Happy Days parody. By the 80s and 90s, he was mostly working on animated shows, but he had some live-action credits too, including The Love Boat. Barry died in 2010.
Now, Peter, have we talked about Hey, It's the King?
I don't think we have, no.
It was Hanna-Barbera's first attempt at an animated Happy Days. Basically, the Fonz character is a lion with a pompadour and a leather jacket. He has a gang of talking animal sidekick characters, and they just hang out and do cool stuff together.
Hey, you guys! The track meet is this afternoon, and we gotta get in shape.
Gee, King, we're already in shape.
A blimp is not exactly the shape I had in mind, Big H.
I think it's really cool that he worked on both The Phil Silver Show and Top Cat, aka Phil Silver's The Animated Series. That's great.
I was mainly focusing on the fact that he wrote for the Partridge Family 2200 AD.
Talk about weird celebrity tie-in cartoons.
Ray Parker was born in 1923 in Ohio. After working on some Bob Hope specials in the early 1970s, including 1972's The Bob Hope Vietnam Christmas Show, he worked almost exclusively in animation from the early 1970s to the late 1980s. He worked on a lot of the shows we've already mentioned, but I'd like to point out a couple of cult favorites on his resume, including Jabberjaw and Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch. His live-action credits are sparse but interesting too. He also worked on the Happy Days competitor California Fever, plus the Far Out Space Nuts, and a 1983-84 series called Benji, Zax, and the Alien Prince, in which the dog Benji goes on outer space adventures. Ray died in 2014.
Now, Peter, I assume you are familiar with Benji to some extent?
To some extent, yes. I'm not an expert, but I do know of him.
I had no idea he did an outer space show. After we record this, I'm going right to the internet to find some space adventures with Benji.
Doing this show, I've realized that the Fonz and the Happy Days gang is not particularly original. Shocker, I know.
Dwayne Poole was one of the younger people on the creative team, having been born in 1948 in Prescott, Arizona. He worked very steadily in TV from the mid-1970s to the 2020s, from animated shows for kids to primetime dramas for adults to made-for-TV movies. Dwayne did it all. Just a smattering of his credits: The Smurfs, The Love Boat, The Fall Guy, The Super Friends, lots of Scooby-Doo projects, countless made-for-TV Christmas movies like A Timeless Christmas and Next Stop Christmas, and even things like Back to the Batcave, The Misadventures of Adam and Bert, and Surviving Gilligan's Island. He even co-wrote Chomps, the ill-fated Hanna-Barbera live-action movie about a robot dog. Dwayne died of cancer in April 2023.
Peter, were you familiar with Chomps?
I was not, no.
Hanna and Barbera were pressured into doing a live-action movie that they didn't want to do.
Oh, no.
And they came up with something about a robot dog because they love robot dogs, which we will see in next week's show.
Tom Swale was another of the younger people to work on this project. He was born in 1946. He was the writing partner of Dwayne Poole, so they share a lot of the same credits. He worked mainly as a writer and story editor in TV from the mid-1970s to the late 1990s, plus one additional TV movie in 2004. Tom got his start working for Sid and Marty Krofft on shows like The Land of the Lost and Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, but before long he was at Hanna-Barbera.
All of us undomesticated riders eventually make our way out here to the Great Salt Lake.
Working on various Flintstones and Scooby-Doo spinoffs, one of his less remembered HB credits was The Biscuits, about a race of tiny medieval dogs. He also worked on that cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue special from 1990. For the last few years of his career, Tom switched gears and wrote crime thrillers and murder mysteries. He died in 2018.
Now, Peter, I assume because of the internet, you know of cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, right?
Yes. Yes, I do. It's weird that it's supposedly anti-drugs, but you've got this ridiculously charismatic personification of smoke, voiced by George C. Scott. If I was a kid, I think it would make me want to do drugs, especially if I got to meet all my favorite cartoon characters.
I think it accomplished the exact opposite of what they wanted it to.
It's very much like Reefer Madness in that way.
As for guest stars, obviously Henry Winkler, Ron Howard, and Donnie Most reprised their roles from Happy Days. Henry's animation credits are extensive. Family Guy, Robot Chicken, The Simpsons, Rugrats, Monsters at Work, All Hail King Julian, Sit Down, Shut Up, Clifford's Puppy Days, King of the Hill, and more. Ron is less known for animation, but has guested on The Simpsons a few times. He's also worked on Osmosis Jones and From Up on Poppy Hill. Undoubtedly, his most famous voice acting role is the narrator of Arrested Development.
Now the story of a wealthy family who lost everything, and the one son who had no choice but to keep them all together.
Don Most also has some voice acting credits outside of this show, mainly as Eric on Dungeons & Dragons and Styles on Teen Wolf. He also did some voices in a 1989 Hey Are the Horrible special and guested on Family Guy. So, Peter, my question to you is, how do you think Henry, Ron, and Don acquit themselves as voice actors on this show?
I think that they all do a very good job. It definitely helps that they have played these roles before, so they know what they're doing, just not physically. There's a thing that a lot of actors who are primarily experienced in live action do. They'll be brought on to do like a high profile voice acting role, and it'll just be sort of because they're not as good at acting with their voices. But I think that Henry and Ron and Don are all pretty good in this.
I think they took to these roles very easily because they are so comfortable playing Richie, Fonzie, and Ralph that there's no learning curve whatsoever. I think here Hanna-Barbera spent their money wisely to get the real actors. Of our new cast members, we should point out Didi Khan as Cupcake.
According to my time band, we're standing on the back of a prehistoric brontosaurus.
Didi is a Brooklyn-born character actress, best known as Frenchie in Grease and Grease 2. She was also a regular on Benson, where she worked with her friend and mentor Robert Guillaume. You 90s kids might remember her as Stacy on Shining Time Station. Peter, what did you think of Didi Khan as Cupcake?
Everything about this character mystifies me. I guess if they wanted to do the characters from Happy Days travel through time, they had to come up with some reason how. It makes sense in a way to have her be a time-traveling girl from the future. What I don't understand is why she also has magical powers. She can zap people into things, and she can apparently walk through walls. What was the logic here? I need to know why she has magic powers. Are we all going to have magic powers in the future? Is that what humans are going to evolve into?
For a while, I was wondering, is she just from the future, or is she also an alien? If she's not from another planet, why does she have a flying saucer? She wouldn't need one to get around on Earth, I wouldn't think. Maybe human beings evolved to have wonky magic powers that work sometimes and don't work at other times.
In the future, we'll all be able to zap rainbows from our fingers that can warp reality.
What did you think of Didi Khan's performance as this character?
I thought that she was terrific. I thought she gave Cupcake a lot of personality. It's a very strange character, but she does very well with what she is given.
She is very cute on this show and very likable. And then there is the legendary Frank Welker, who plays Mr. Cool as well as a number of supporting roles. He also does the voiceover during the bumpers.
We now return with Fonz and the Happy Days gang.
Frank is a superhumanly prolific voice actor and comedian from Denver, Colorado, who has been working in TV and film since the late 1960s. He has over 800 credits and will probably reach 1,000 before his career is over. His most famous character is Fred Jones on Scooby-Doo, but you've definitely heard him on The Real Ghostbusters, The Simpsons, Animaniacs, Muppet Babies, Transformers, Garfield, The Smurfs, and literally hundreds more. Peter, what did you think of Frank Welker as Mr. Cool?
I love Frank Welker. If you were born after 1970, then this man was a big part of your childhood. That goes for all of us. I don't want to disrespect him when I say that I hate Mr. Cool and I want him to die. He did not create this character. He's just voicing him. It's just a paycheck. It's fine.
It pains me to say that Mr. Cool is my least favorite part of this show because Frank Welker's voice is just such a part of my childhood and just brings back such memories every time I hear it. Frank Welker is a very talented guy, and he's been given this terrible character to play. So, the opening narration is by Wolfman Jack.
We got it all together now, gang!
Born Robert Weston Smith, he was a legendary disc jockey and advertising pitchman, best known for his appearance in American Graffiti in 1973. Though Smith bounced around the radio industry under different names in the 1950s, he didn't develop his Wolfman Jack persona until 1963, when he was broadcasting from just across the Mexican border. He later moved to Los Angeles and started syndicating his broadcasts to stations across America. Sadly, he died of a heart attack in 1995. I don't think Wolfman Jack was exactly a health nut, as you can hear in his voice, Peter. What did you think of Wolfman Jack as our narrator?
Wolfman Jack gets the absolutely most unhinged section to narrate. He has to set the stage for what we, the viewers, are seeing. Okay, so Fonzie and Richie and Ralph and Fonzie's talking dog, Mr. Cool, met this girl from the future, and now they're traveling through time, hoping that each leap will be the leap home.
Wolfman Jack reads it with such conviction that as a kid, I instantly understood and instantly believed him. My only objection now to the narration is that he lumps Richie and Ralph together as the good group. What? That's like some And the Rest stuff from Gilligan's Island. I was like, the good group. The billing goes, the Fonz, his doggy named Mr. Cool, and the good group. One flaky time machine, and a future chick known as Cupcake. So Fonzie gets top billing. Mr. Cool somehow gets second billing. The good group, which no one ever says that on Happy Days or this show. And then the time machine gets fourth billing, and then Cupcake fifth. I don't know. That seems unfair to me. I guess they didn't have time to say Richie and Ralph.
Too many syllables.
As for songs, there are none, but the music for the Fonz and the Happy Days gang was provided by the legendary Hoyt Curtin, who was Hanna-Barbera's go-to composer from the 1950s to the 1980s, working on pretty much all the HB shows you remember: Flintstones, Jetsons, Johnny Quest, Smurfs, Scooby-Doo, Super Friends, and much more. He started working with William Hanna and Joseph Barbera in the 1950s when they were still at MGM doing Tom and Jerry cartoons. Hoyt retired in the late 1980s, except for a few religious cartoons in the 1990s, and died in the year 2000. Peter, what did you think of the theme song for Fonz and the Happy Days gang?
It's very 50s pop pastiche. You know, you got the sha-la-la-la-la-la-la. It feels like background music you'd hear on American Bandstand or something.
In a weird way, the show that takes the characters out of the 50s kind of brings back the feel of the early seasons of Happy Days with all that doo-wop music and 50s music. And even though he recycles some of his music from other shows, I think Hoyt does a pretty good job scoring this one. As for cultural and historical references, this episode's title is a possible reference to Queen for a Day, the infamous 1950s game show we have discussed before. As a reminder, this was a show on which housewives would share their hard luck stories. The one with the saddest story was declared the winner. Aww. There are at least 3 identifiable dinosaurs in this episode: Brontosaurus, the Triceratops, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The Brontosaurus lived during the late Jurassic period, about 145 to 157 million years ago. The Triceratops and the Tyrannosaurus are actually much more recent, only about 66 to 83 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period.
I did know that because I was a big dinosaur fan as a child, like a lot of children. Also, Brontosauruses are not considered real dinosaurs anymore. Generally speaking, it is accepted that they are the same as a Patasaurus. Paleontologists just initially thought they were different because they did not have all the facts yet.
The earliest human ancestors, on the other hand, only appeared 6 million years ago, meaning there was about 60 million years separating the last dinosaurs from the first humans. So many movies and TV shows lied to us, Peter. Mr. Cool briefly adopts the deerstalker hat and magnifying glass associated with Sherlock Holmes. Only one of these actually comes from the stories of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and that's the magnifying glass. The hat was added by illustrators when the stories were first published in England and America. Now, does Mr. Cool adopt a lot of costumes and disguises over the course of the series, do you think, Peter?
I think so, yeah. That's kind of his thing. He is probably the most cartoonish character here in the sense of breaking reality and remaking it. That's also kind of Cupcake's thing, but hers has more in-universe justification beyond it's a cartoon and she can do that.
It seems like Mr. Cool is the only one who can pull props and costumes out of nowhere just for a joke. One of his little costumes did briefly worry me. I think he becomes sort of a Native American tracker for a few seconds.
He's got a headband with a feather in it. It doesn't go as far as it could have, which is probably for the best.
Yeah, they abandoned that joke after just a few seconds, which I was glad of. When deciding which of the captives should be king, the caveman says, "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo."
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
This is a children's counting out rhyme that goes back to at least the early 1800s, probably in England. Some versions of the rhyme include a racial slur, but this seems to have been peculiar to the American version.
I've only ever heard it as catch a tiger by the toe, but I'm not surprised that there's a racist version that is specific to America.
The cavemen in this episode have founded a village.
A prehistoric village.
Sorry, but the earliest human villages only go back to about 7,000 to 10,000 BCE. Fonzie says, "Take us to your leader."
Take us to your leader.
Leader.
This science fiction cliche apparently goes back to a 1953 cartoon in which an alien asks a horse to be taken to the president.
Normal words, but a horse guy.
The phrase "take me to your leader" was also used in a 1957 episode of The Adventures of Superman.
Please take me to your leader.
What did you say?
Take me to your leader.
That's what I thought you said.
This episode includes some classic cliches identified on TV tropes as god guys. That's tricking the natives into thinking you're a god. Grapes of luxury. That's when servant women feed you grapes because you're in charge. And appease the volcano god. Later, one of the cavemen has difficulty counting to 3 because he forgets what comes after 2.
What comes after 2?
There's a very similar joke to this in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and the exact same joke, word for word, in Amazing Man by John Bird.
1, 2,
no. We'll come after 2.
Peter, did you find this show to be exceptionally tropey?
Yeah, it makes up for the absurdity of its premise by leaning hard on things from other cartoons and other TV shows and other movies.
I guess that's a way of helping the story along, is that you have all of these cliche elements. When you see Ralph lying around and they're fanning him and feeding him grapes, you get, oh, okay, I've seen this in other movies.
Also, I'm pretty sure grapes should not exist in the prehistoric era.
But it has to be grapes for the cliche. We also see a primitive bear in this episode. Bears go back about 20 million years, but they started out small, about the size of house cats. And I wish the writers of the show had known that, because I think bears the size of house cats would be adorable.
Bears are so cute, but they're also so scary. So like a bear the size of a house cat would be kind of perfect.
Fonzie says, "Let my people go."
I say, let my people go.
That's directly from the Bible. In the book of Exodus, chapter 5, verse 1, Moses says it to the Pharaoh. A caveman voiced by Frank Welker says, "Saw something, didn't see something. Saw something.
Saw something, didn't see something. Saw something."
This is a variation on the old game, He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not, which goes back to 19th century France, although I guess in this universe it goes back to caveman times. And Fonzie says the Brontosaurus is not exactly a Harley. We've already pointed out that Fonz didn't usually ride a Harley on Happy Days, despite that company being based in Milwaukee. Generally, he rode a Triumph.
I pray, dear God, please send me a Harley if you could.
Other observations this week. If Fonz and his pals are trying to get back to 1957, that would put this show somewhere around season 3 or season 4 in the Happy Days timeline. Is that when you think this story takes place?
I think so. As we have said before, time is weird on Happy Days.
Because this is a time travel story, presumably they could come back to the exact second. So it could have just happened like they went out to the parking lot at Arnold's. They went on this time travel adventure. It didn't literally take them any time. And then they just go right back in. And Potsy is like, "Hey, what have you guys been up to?" And they're like, nothing. And they just never tell him about it.
That is exactly what happened.
At the end of this episode, Cupcake says that the ship will take off in 10 seconds.
The countdown's already started. We take off in 10 seconds.
It's actually more like 30. This is another pet peeve of mine, when there's a countdown that lasts way longer than what it should. They make fun of this on Saturday Night Live with the MacGruber sketches, where it's like 10 seconds MacGruber, and then it's like a minute-long sketch. Henry Winkler specifically asked the producers of Happy Days not to show Fonzie combing his hair on camera, but his character in this cartoon combs his hair frequently. Did you notice all the hair combing in this?
I guess either the producers of this did not get the memo, or it was figured, it's a cartoon. It's not the same thing.
I would have to guess that this was something that the animators added just to give Fonzie little bits of business to do when he's on screen.
It's like how smoking was incredibly popular in movies because, one, it was a thing that a lot of people did, and two, it gave actors something to do with their hands.
Now, Peter, I have decided to keep track of some of the things that Cupcake says on this show.
Oh, boy.
Her catchphrases. Now, the ones I counted in this one were moon craters, which she says 3 times, galloping galaxies, and cosmic comets.
I liked galloping galaxies. That's very fun imagery. This does feel very much in continuity with the Jetsons' conception of the future. The future as imagined by the Jetsons, where everything is like space-themed. They have names like Mr. Spacely, and they work for Spacely Sprockets. And instead of singing "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey," they sing "Won't You Come Home, Bill Spacely."
Peter, I have also decided to keep track in each episode of the number of times that Mr. Cool makes things better and the number of times that Mr. Cool makes things worse. I only found one where he made things better in this episode. He points out that the dinosaur is about to eat Bruta so that Fonzie can save her. The number of times he makes things worse: number 1, he sends the time machine off course. Number 2, he knocks the time machine off the Brontosaurus's back into the water. Number 3, he goes the wrong way when the gang is escaping. And number 4, he sends the time machine off course again. I have to wonder, if they're going to get home, aren't they just going to have to abandon Mr. Cool in some other time period and just forget about him conveniently?
He is the Gilligan of this show. Just eat him.
Peter, did you have any other observations you wanted to make about King for a Day?
There's an urban legend that Hanna-Barbera originally wanted to do a Doctor Who cartoon, but they couldn't get the rights. They could get the rights to Happy Days, so they just repurposed all of the plots and designs for this time machine from that Doctor Who concept. That is not true. I know it's not true, because that's not how making a TV show works. You don't just come up with a show and then try and get the rights to it. That's not the order that you do things in. And also, in the 1980s, Happy Days was much more popular with American viewers than Doctor Who was. That was very much specifically a British thing in 1980.
It took decades before Doctor Who caught on in America. This is a strange question. Were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
I did like Bruta's cave person outfit. It's very Flintstones-esque. It's a sexy little animal skin mini dress. She's got a bone in her hair like a bow. It's very cute.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
I'm not gonna lie, I did have a lot of fun with this episode because it's just so bizarre. It's a very strange combination of bizarre and cliche. It's like nothing you've ever seen before, but it's also like everything you've ever seen before. I don't think it's the best episode of this show, but it does successfully set the stage for what the rest of the show will be.
A show like this, if it were being made today, would have an entire pilot setting up the premise. There would be a reason why Cupcake landed her spaceship in the parking lot at Arnold's and a reason for them to get on the spaceship. They don't bother with any of that. They just have the theme song that explains the premise, and then we're off to the races. They're just in dinosaur times, and you have to live with it.
Well, a big part of that was because Hanna-Barbera shows were often made for syndication. So basically, you don't really want to have a consistent plot storyline, because then if people watch it out of order, they get confused.
These episodes could be shown in any order. I thought the show was really goofy, but really fun. It really helps that Richie, Ralph, and Fonzie are very much in character. This brings us back to the energy of the early years of Happy Days. This would have been concurrent with season 8 of the live action Happy Days, which was a far cry from what the show had been. So it kind of took putting them in outer space in a time machine to get it back to the Happy Days that we knew from the early years. And I kind of wish Fonzie had taken Bruta with him. I think he and Bruta could have had a nice relationship. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at petervillafranc.bsky.social.
They can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysare.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysarepodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket next time we talk?
Next time, we've been to the far past, so now we're going to the far future, and instead of a sexy cave lady who wants to get into Fonzie's pants, we've got a sexy, evil, robot alien lady who wants to get into Fonzie's pants. And may the farce be with you.
May the force be with you.
Oh, there he goes with that crap again. Keep it in church, man.
That sounds very thrilling indeed. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back. Back into time. When the only people that existed were troglodytes. Cavemen. Cave women. Neanderthal. Troglodytes. Let's take the average caveman at home, listening to his stereo.
After we record this, I'm going right to the internet to find some space adventures with Benji.